Because of the protests by wrestlers in India, various Western media outlets have found yet another opportunity to release their poisonous propaganda against India. Words like "democracy is dying in India," "freedom of expression is dying in India," "Indian males are sexual predators," or "India is world's most unsafe country for women" are being heard once again. So, Western media sharks, listen carefully. In this episode, your months of propaganda will be neutralized in less than 10 minutes. Not only that, I will also reveal the ugly truth that you seem to be too afraid to uncover. Point 1. To start with, brainwashed victims of the predatory Western media should understand that the investigation is already underway in this case. And as reported here, the Delhi police has taken up the case, recording the statements of the victims and forming a special investigation team to investigate the allegations. So, an investigation is already underway, right? But then, why are the Western media sharks still releasing poison? These images have gone viral on the internet, right? But how can one calm down a strong wrestler who, through his sheer strength, can easily outmuscle or overpower you? Yet, for many colonial media sharks, the pictures of the protesters being detained were enough to spread propaganda that India doesn't allow protests and Indian security forces and police forces are absolutely inhuman. In other words, according to them, democracy has died in India. Of course, you think that was pretty rough, right? So, I welcome you to Europe. Our European security forces will show you how it is done. Shouldn't we see the reality or learn from the countries where democracy is considered so alive? Let's start with France. Look at this man's face. Look at his left eye. This is what can happen to a peaceful protester's face where, according to the colonial media sharks, democracy is alive. Yes, in an alive democracy, he lost his eye while peacefully attending a protest. As reported here, like most of the 30 people who were blinded in one eye by French security forces during the Yellow Vest protests, he unsuccessfully filed a police complaint. And look at this one. French police spraying gas on protesters at point-blank range and then dragging them. Now, this is Finland. Another example of a democracy that is considered to be very alive and is often presented as a Western role model. See how peaceful protesters have been treated by police officers in Finland? Seriously? Spraying chemicals on human beings as if they were cockroaches? Is this the real face of Western democracies? Yes, many in the West complain about the Indian Army's tough response in Kashmir against terrorists and terrorist-funded activists, but then in the West, they do this to their country's own peaceful protesters. Or how about the so-called champion of democracy, the USA? Take a look at this. The US police SUV driving into protesters, sending them flying. Those scenes are from Detroit. And that's how the New York police vehicles have treated protesters. Take a look at Western democracy's horror. Now see this. That's how German police has treated climate activists, beating them in the stomach and on the head. That's Spain. That's Canada. Protesters receiving a brutal horse treatment by the Canadian police. Maybe in this particular incident, these Indian wrestlers were lucky that they were protesting in India and not in some so-called alive Western democracy where police SUVs, horses, German shepherds and dangerous chemicals could have already been used against them by now. Haven't you heard of the American I can't breathe horror? Haven't you heard of the French I can't breathe horror? Are they hiding all this from you? These are Western democracies, very alive and functioning as usual. And of course, on top of that, in these Western colonial criminal states, laws are passed or approved that can make life even more difficult for the protesters. Take a look at this. And this. Point 3. Because of the Western media's propaganda, many now assume that protests are no longer allowed in India. Having lived in both India and in the Western world, I can tell you that in India, on many occasions, the law enforcement and the Indian security forces are far more flexible and lenient towards protesters. In India, many protests are held in public places even without any prior permission. On the other hand, the situation in the so-called alive democracies in the West seems to be quite different. Spain. In 2017, Open Democracy reported that in Spain, organizers of protests and the participants face many challenges. Read this. A gathering or demonstration with more than 20 people requires prior notification to the authorities in writing and at least 10 days in advance. Spanish legislation doesn't allow for spontaneous demonstrations. And read this. Participants attending a demonstration of which the police haven't been notified can be fined between €300 and 30,050 euros simply for their attendance. I mean, a fine of up to 25 lakhs rupees for attending a protest? Wow. Colonial criminal states. Wow. But of course, your democracy is alive. Now, let's look at Finland, the Western world's favorite darling democracy. This is the official website of Finland's police. Read what is written here. The police can interrupt a demonstration if the advice, request, or orders of the police are not followed. Read this again. If the orders of the police are not followed. Also this. The police may apprehend a demonstrator on these grounds. And that also includes verbal violent behavior. As you can understand, the definitions of these terms can be very broad and can be easily misused against the protesters. And see how they justify the use of horses. Read this. Police officers sitting high on a horse have a calming effect on crowds. Seriously? Calming effect? You mean the same calming effect from police horses that was seen in Canada? Now Germany. Read what is written here. Authorities can deny permission to hold such a demonstration or assembly if the event could endanger public safety or order. Now, it must be pointed out that the right to strike is an intrinsic part of the fundamental right of freedom of association. But then, see this. It was reported that a German constitutional court ruling confirmed that civil servants do not have the right to strike. Yes, you heard that right. They do not have the right to strike. But of course, democracy is still alive in this genocidal criminal colonial state. And finally, the heart and soul of our European Union, Belgium. This is the official website that belongs to the city of Brussels. Now read this. Each gathering, demonstration or parade of any kind in public spaces is subject to the authorization of the government, and the mayor will or will not give permission for the demonstration. And you were told that we Europeans were living in a free world. But all this sounds a bit like China, right? Point 4. As a society, we shouldn't tolerate even one case of sexual violence. But then why is it that many in the Western media want to deceitfully label India as the rape capital and Indian men as sexual predators when sexual violence seems to be the way of life in the Western world, whether it's sports or anything else? Now listen to these harsh figures. Nearly 6 million children and young adults in the United States are survivors of sexual violence through their participation in sports. Yes, you heard that right. Millions of victims. The NSPCC's survey of 6,000 students in the UK highlighted that 29% had experienced sexual harassment in sport. Dr. Tijn Verteman's research involving 4,000 adults who had participated in sport as children in Belgium and the Netherlands revealed that 14% had experienced sexual violence. Not only that, the survey of 1,529 German elite athletes showed that a mind-boggling 37.6% of the athletes had experienced at least one sexual violence situation in organized sport. In Germany, the culture of sexual violence runs deep, voices are silenced, and even the male athletes are not spared. Have you heard of the case of Olympic diver Jan Hempel, who accused the German Swimming Federation of ignoring sexual abuse? These French minor girls, these American gymnasts, or the failure of FA to protect children in the West, there seems to be no end to this horror. But have you ever even heard the stories of all these survivors? And yes, there is massive underreporting, a poor prosecution rate, a poor conviction rate, and millions of victims, including those whose story was never covered by the Western media sharks. That's the story of our European and American athletes. Point 5. In a properly functioning democracy, anybody who commits crimes should be punished. It doesn't matter if you are a powerful politician, coach, an athlete, an Olympic medal winner, or anyone else. An example of that was seen in India when Sushil Kumar was arrested. Of course, it also doesn't mean that they will help you get away from your crimes for the rest of your life if you have won medals for India. Yes, India's democracy may not be perfect, but in many ways it is far better than the Western democracies who have not only oppressed or silenced their own people, but have also colonized, oppressed, neo-colonized or silenced others. See you again.